The state of Salzburg, with the city of Salzburg as its capital, was a rather peculiar entity within the Holy Roman Empire. It was an ecclesiastical province with a prince archbishop and the kind of prudish, repressive government that always goes hand in hand with that kind of system. Most of Salzburg's cultural institutions and buildings are still in existence. The residence palace, where opera was lavishly performed as early as 1614, and the cathedral. Mozart's birthplace profits to this day from its former ruler's passion for preservation. For all the turmoil going on all around it, Salzburg was never destroyed, not even during the 30 Years' War. And yet, to this day, Salzburg is still threatened with invasion. Only this time, the marauders descend upon the city by train, plane, car, and bus, armed to the teeth with travelers' checks and veritable arsenals of cameras. Salzburg's geographical location, with Milan and Venice on the one side, Prague and Vienna on the other, brought the city a wide variety of cultural influences. And yet, for all of this, it remained an insignificant, narrow-minded county seat where the entire Mozart family knew Wolfgang could never realize his full artistic potential. His father had accomplished his incredible social climb largely through an uncanny ability to play the game of life, when he had to, by the traditional rules. And yet the more he saw of the world on his concert tours with the family, the less this game and its rules meant to him. Even so, for all his revulsion at what he called Salzburg's mendicant court, he never completely made the break. He couldn't. On the one hand, he was torn between his yearning for recognition and his loyalty to the church, which had given him an education usually accorded only to members of the high aristocracy. On the other hand, he had a family to support, and his chances elsewhere were too uncertain. For the younger Mozart, revered today as Salzburg's favorite son, his native city was merely a point of departure he couldn't get away from soon enough. Ironically, while Mozart was keenly aware he would have to leave home to seek his fortunes, and rather liked the idea, nowadays the whole world comes to Salzburg because of him.
And now have a look through the archway on the left-hand side and you'll see Mozart's birthplace. In the apartment where Mozart was brought up. Here he lived until he was 17 years old, and then the family were able to buy a house on the other side of the river where he was used to live until he was 25. On the other side of the river, in Mozart's dwelling house, he wrote most of his compositions he created in Salzburg. And when he was
Today's Salzburg, with its Mozart scholarship, its Mozart publications, its Mozart festivals, has become the ultimate shrine of Mozart pilgrimage, a kind of musical theme park running from the sublime of definitive Mozart festival performances to the ridiculous of Mozart sweatshirts, Mozart keychains, Mozart beer mugs, Mozart chocolates, and 18th century wrought iron signs in front of, believe it or not, McDonald's. It wasn't until March 1773, when the family returned from its extensive European tours, that Wolfgang began spending longer periods of time in Salzburg. The family had now moved into the larger and pleasanter dancing master's house. The long years of touring had left an indelible mark on both Mozart's personal development and his creativity. A period of colossal productivity, even by Mozart standards, began. What's more, although he was no longer a child prodigy, he had little trouble getting his music performed for the right people. His exposure to the great royal courts of Europe had given him the polish and sophistication to operate smoothly on the highest levels of society. He found friends and commissions among the nobility, and he managed to produce 5 violin concertos in 1 year, 3 of which are now a permanent part of the violin repertoire. He also wrote 3 piano concertos for his pupils, quartets, piano sonatas, dinner music for the court, festival music for the university. In other words, he wrote music for every and any occasion. And as always, he did so with remarkable speed. He wrote for the church as well, eager to put his studies with Padre Martini into tangible form. And it was this former teacher he wrote to when planning his next tour.
Most revered Padre Maestro, my esteemed patron, The regard, the esteem, and the respect which I cherish for your illustrious person have prompted me to trouble you with this letter, and to send you a humble specimen of my music, which I submit to your masterly judgment. I composed for last year's carnival at Munich an opera buffa, La Finta Giardiniera. A few days before my departure, the Elector expressed a desire to hear some of my contrapuntal compositions. I was therefore obliged to write this motet in a great hurry, in order to have time to have the score copied for His Highness, and to have the parts written out, and thus enable it to be performed during the offertory at High Mass on the following Sunday. Most beloved and esteemed Signor Padre Maestro, I beg you most earnestly to tell me frankly and without reserve what you think of it. We live in this world in order to learn industriously, and by interchanging our ideas to enlighten one another, and thus endeavour to promote the sciences and the fine arts. Oh, how often have I longed to be near you, most reverend Father, so that I might be able to talk and have discussion with you. For I live in a country where music leads a struggling existence. Though indeed, apart from those who have left us, we still have excellent teachers, and particularly composers of great wisdom, learning, and taste. As for the theatre, we are in a bad way for lack of singers. We have no castrati, and we shall never have them because they insist on being handsomely paid, and generosity is not one of our faults. Meanwhile, I am amusing myself by writing chamber music and music for the church.
Mozart had his reasons for writing that letter. He saw no chance of getting ahead in Salzburg. There was no decent orchestra, and most importantly, no opera house. The town saved money on singers and even cut corners on church music. This remoteness from Martini can quite simply be seen as Mozart's longing to be back in Italy. In due course, Martini wrote back.
I received your motets along with your kind letter, and I can tell you in all sincerity it pleased me much. Good harmonies, mature modulations, natural flow of voice leading, and excellent craftsmanship. Keep at it unstintingly, for nature demands practice and great study as long as we live.
Courteous, but aloof. A kind of 18th century version of "Don't call us, we'll call you." In January of 1777, the pianist Mlle. Jeunehomme from Paris visited the Mozarts in Salzburg. We know very little about her. None of the reference books even lists her first name. But she must have been a great pianist, because this concerto he wrote for her, K271, was a giant step forward in Mozart's creativity. Even in a career as remarkable as his, this piece represents a major departure both from anything he had written before or any of the other music he was composing at the time. Much of his previous piano music had been written for more or less gifted pupils, and to some degree reflected the challenge of writing important music for less than important performers. To judge by this concerto, however, Mlle. Jeunehomme must have been both a pianist of remarkable technical prowess and an authentic keyboard philosopher. In short, an artist with a keen sense of musicianship and a sincere profundity of soul. This final movement, for example, runs the full gamut of any pianist's artistry, ranging from subtlety to pyrotechnics, from high drama to philosophically introspective meditative passages, extremely rare in a concerto finale from any musical period.
My conscience tells me that I owe it to God to be grateful to my father, who has spent his time unwearyingly upon my education, so that I may lighten his burden, look after myself, and later be able to support my sister. For I should be sorry to think that she should have spent so many hours at the harpsichord and not be able to make good use of her training.
For all its cunning diplomacy, this letter could not have had a more negative effect. The Archbishop simply fired Wolfgang, and Leopold was told that if he left Salzburg again, both his job and his salary would be terminated. So Mozart set off with his mother. It's interesting that even at the age of 21, he was not considered old enough to travel on his own. Nannerl remained with her father at home. Wolfgang practiced his languages, as well as his violin and keyboard repertoire for coming performances. He had already written more than 300 compositions, which were newly sorted out and the best and the most useful ones packed up. On March 23, 1778, mother and son arrived in Paris, a 4-month stay in Mannheim already behind them. Wolfgang's first and most influential contact was Baron von Grimm, who arranged Wolfgang's access to the musical world, introducing him grandly with this Paris Symphony, which opened the season. His father was pleased to hear about this initial success, but still cautioned his son not to lose sight of the practicalities of life. Clearly, no matter how far away Leopold might have been, he still ran the show.
Give lessons. Write for the theatre and concerts on the side.
And as always, look for a permanent position. By May of '78, one seemed to be in the offing.
He's offered me the post of organist at Versailles. The salary is 2,000 livres a year, but I should have to spend 6 months at Versailles and the other 6 in Paris, or wherever I like. I don't think I shall accept it.
So what was he doing in Paris? Most importantly, he was honing his talents as a chamber music composer with a series of splendid sonatas, both for piano solo and for piano and violin. And then there was this unique composition, Les Petits Riens, his one and only ballet score. Conditions in Paris were very strenuous for both Mozarts. Wolfgang spent great quantities of time and money traveling to the private salons of the nobility, giving lessons to, as he wrote, talentless ladies. And his mother had an even harder time of it.
Considering my accustomed style, these conditions are anything but pleasant. I sit alone in my room all day as if I were in solitary confinement. On top of that, the room is dark and opens on a small courtyard that doesn't see a bit of sunshine all day. If I really put my mind to it, I can do a bit of knitting when the light shines into the room.
On April 9th, Grimm paid her a visit and tried to cheer her up, promising to find them better accommodation, which he did 2 days later. But shortly after they moved, she became seriously ill. Leopold immediately sent her some of his own special remedies, which got her back on her feet for a little while, but not for long. She went for walks here in the Luxembourg Gardens, but they didn't help. Her condition worsened, and the doctor sent by Baron von Grimm could do nothing for her. She died on Friday, the 3rd of July, 1778, at the age of 58. The tact and compassion with which the still very young Mozart dealt with the always onerous task of breaking the terrible news to his family, bore eloquent testimony to his sensitivity and kindness. Knowing how shocked his father and sister would be to receive the bad news in writing, but unable to rush to Salzburg to tell them personally, he sat up most of the night writing 3 long and beautiful letters. In the first one, to his father, he pretended his mother was still alive, but warned him to be prepared for the worst. And then in a second letter, he asked the family priest to relate the news to his father and sister personally, begging him to do whatever he saw fit to make sure his father wouldn't take it too hard. A few days later, on the 9th of July, he poured out his true feelings.
I hope you are now prepared to hear with fortitude one of the saddest and most painful stories. My last letter of the 3rd will have told you that no good news could be hoped for. On that very day, the 3rd, at 21 minutes past 10 at night, my mother fell asleep, peacefully in the Lord. Indeed, when I wrote to you, she was already enjoying the blessings of heaven, for all was then over. I wrote to you during that night, and I hope that you and my dearest sister will forgive me for this slight but very necessary deception, for as I judged from my own grief and sorrow what yours would be, I could not bring myself to shock you suddenly with this dreadful news. I have suffered and wept enough, but to what avail? So I have tried to console myself, and you should too, my dear father, my dear sister. Weep your fill, but take comfort at last. Remember that Almighty God willed it thus, and how can we rebel against him? Let us rather pray to him and thank him for his goodness, for she died a very happy death. In those distressing moments, there were 3 things that consoled me: my entire and steadfast submission to the will of God, and the sight of her very easy and beautiful death, which made me feel that in that moment she had become so happy. For how much happier is she now than we are? Indeed, I wished at that moment to depart with her. From this wish and longing grew my 3rd source of consolation, the thought that she is not lost to us forever, that we shall see her again, and that we shall live together far more happily and blissfully than ever in this world. We do not yet know when it will be, but that doesn't disturb me. When God wills it, I am ready.
The author of that letter was barely 21 years of age. Surely, Mozart's fundamentally positive attitude, even in the face of tragedy, was a major factor in helping him bounce back from his despondency. A fortuitous occurrence played its part as well.
Mr. Bach from London has been here for the last fortnight. You can easily imagine his delight and mine at meeting again. I love him, as you know, and respect him with all my heart. And as for him, there is no doubt that he has praised me warmly too, not only to my face, but to others also. I must now tell you how I happened to be at Saint-Germain. As you already know, for I am told that I was brought here 15 years ago, though I don't remember it, the Marechal de Noailles lives here.
The Duc de Noailles maintained a magnificent musical ensemble, for whom Mozart hurriedly wrote a scene for soprano and 14 obbligato instruments. The piece was performed here in the Noailles family palace. Time has been less than kind to this palace, and it is now split down the middle with a road running through it. This short stay in France was drawing to a close. It was to be the last time Mozart ever went there. After brief stopovers on the way home, Mozart was back in Salzburg, his backwoods point of departure, without a job and with a stack of debts his father would spend years paying back. It is a matter of record that Mozart thought this period of his life a resounding failure. It's undeniable that he felt this way, but for those of us with the luxury of hindsight, it is equally undeniable that this was one of the most musically fruitful periods of his entire career. And it all began with that remarkable visit from Mlle. Jeunehomme, one of the few important musicians in Mozart's own lifetime who ever actually came to him in Salzburg, the way everybody does today. The most enduring product of that encounter was a concerto of outstanding maturity. What followed was a frustrating and ultimately tragic journey that would put that maturity to a cruel test. The magnificent concerto and the terrible journey gave eloquent testimony to Mozart's uncanny ability to rise to occasions good and bad, moving from strength to strength, both as a musician and a human being.